Okay, so it is a great pleasure for me to participate in mLearn 2020, the 19th World Conference on Mobile Blended and Seamless Learning. And in my presentation, I will talk about the findings from an exploration of student experiences with social media and mobile technologies during the emergency transition to remote education. So this was a study that took place during the lockdown period, which was imposed in order to contain the effects of COVID-19 pandemic. So the focus of my research was to explore how students experience this emergency transition from the traditional conventional all-campus learning to online remote education. So the fact that this transition was both rapid and imposed brought changes in students' lives worldwide and affected their learning experiences and engagement in various ways. So we'll start first with an introduction to the study motivation and the research questions. I will then outline the methodology and research design I used. And finally, I will discuss the findings stemming from the thematic analysis of the gathered data. Okay, so overall, mobile computing technologies, as we all know, have profoundly affected all aspects of our lives due to the ubiquity and seamless integration of technology into everyday tasks. Mobile devices expand a notion of learning in a traditional place like a classroom or a computer lab into distributed learning spaces. So essentially, mobile learning is all about learning across multiple contexts and spaces through social and content interactions. Mobile learning is supported by a range of technologies, including virtual learning environments and learning management systems, mobile Web2 tools, including blogs and wikis, social networking sites, and instant messaging mobile apps, such as Facebook Messenger, Skype, WhatsApp, Viber, and so on. And especially the last two, social networking sites and instant messaging applications, are quite popular with university students in general, but also they were quite popular during the lockdown as well. So social media enable seamless integration of learning activities, both formal and informal, and they can enhance collaboration and learner engagement. However, the literature suggests that without appropriate structure, the use of social media can negatively impact student learning. Therefore, understanding the students' perceptions and attitudes towards social media is invaluable in determining the role that they can play in the future of mobile, blended, and seamless learning. Furthermore, while classroom-based teaching, the traditional classroom-based teaching and mobile learning each have their merits, it's not always a matter of choosing one over the other, which leads to the context of this particular study. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, academic communities worldwide have been presented with several challenges. And in many countries around the world, campuses remain closed following official regulations for social distancing and restricted mobility. So this emergency transition from the traditional classroom-based teaching and learning to online remote education was both rapid and imposed because of the rapidly unfolding COVID-19 crisis. During this emergency transition, the role of mobile computing technologies has been vital. With the assistance of mobile technologies, higher education institutions have readily reacted to all these challenges, and they continue functioning despite the unique circumstances that were presented because of the pandemic. There are, however, key aspects that we need to explore in order to understand how students, and in my case, how undergraduate students experience these challenges. And this basically guided the research questions addressed in my study. So the initial motivation for the study was my observation that the lecturer-student dynamics, as well as my students' engagement, changed during the online lectures compared with teaching the same students right before the lockdown. So this observation gave rise to a set of exploratory research questions, which are the following. First, how did undergraduate students experience learning through mobile computing devices under lockdown? Secondly, how did students' experiences impact their engagement and academic performance? And finally, what role did social media play from the students' point of view during the emergency transition to remote education? Now, gathering the students' insights and perceptions is a valuable tool for understanding what students do, how they experience a particular situation, and that was the focus in this study, to see the things from their eyes, from their viewpoints. and also to understand why certain aspects are important to them. So this particular study was conducted in a higher education institution in Cyprus, and teaching at this institution is traditionally delivered face-to-face. So for this reason, there were no learning procedures or distance learning platforms in place before COVID-19 lockdown. So this presented a genuine opportunity for exploring the stories and voices of students at this institution regarding their experiences and perceptions on the emergency transition to remote education, because this is something they were not prepared for. So qualitative data was gathered from 43 undergraduate students, both part-time and full-time students participated in the study. And the students were taking modules from different subjects, including business administration, computing, finance and accounting, mathematics, amongst others. And the aim was to gather the typical perspectives from students at different levels of their studies and listen to unique stories and viewpoints. Special attention was also placed on gender equality and inclusivity by ensuring that a comparable number of female and male students is represented in the study, 22 and 21 respectively. And the ages of the students were between 18 and 47 years. Students' perspectives were gathered through in-depth semi-structured interviews with an average duration of 1 hour. But there were interviews that lasted more than 2 hours, and students were very keen and eager to discuss about their experiences because, as I said, these interviews took place during the lockdown. So it was quite topical for them, and this is something they wanted to share and discuss. So the interviews took place during April-May 2020. So first, I requested for official approval, and this was granted from the institution, and then individual informed consent was subsequently invited from each participant. I used the snowballing technique to reach students and invite them to an interview. So having established initial contact through social media, I sent them an invitation explaining the aims and objectives in writing. I used Facebook Messenger to reach the students. And then we arranged for an interview on a mutually convenient date and time. All interviews we used the online platform that the higher education institution was using for delivering the online lecture. So in that way, I knew that the students already had access to that platform, so we used that one. All the interviews were video recorded, except 3 for which the students opted for audio recording only, so they had the choice for that. And I used a semi-structured interview agenda to facilitate the discussion, but the flow obviously was adjusted to follow students' leads and explore emerging views. So moving on to data analysis quickly, preliminary analysis obviously involved transcribing the interviews, reading the transcripts several times, and I used color coding during the thematic analysis to facilitate these analytical stages. The findings from the thematic analysis were grouped under these 3 themes. First, the multifaceted role of social media in keeping students engaged during the emergency distance education. Secondly, the students' positive experiences with using mobile computing devices to support their learning under lockdown. And third, the frustrations from learning at a distance with mobile technologies. In the paper, I use verbatim quotes quite extensively, and I will present some of these in the next few slides in order to communicate the findings in the students' own voices and to demonstrate their own meaning-making processes. So starting off with the first theme, the multifaceted role of social media, it was evident that social media, especially Messenger, Viber, and Facebook, played a significant role in supporting student learning and nurturing learner engagement. The role of this application goes beyond just supplementing the formal educational technologies such as the LMS and the video conferencing platform. Actually, students leveraged the role of social media in relation to the quarantine and the restrictions enforced because of COVID-19 pandemic. As Mia said, before the lockdown, we could visit our lecturers at their offices for questions or clarifications or just to say hi. I missed that. It was so nice when some lecturers invited us to join their social networks or created group chats. It's not the same, but it's not something. And a part-time student said, what I miss the most now in the lockdown is those 5-minute breaks between lectures, or those 5 minutes at the end of the lecture, where we could walk up to the lecturer's desk and ask a question. Exchanging messages on Messenger is a great alternative given the circumstances. So we could see that the students appreciated the fact that some of their lecturers were actually active and responsive on social media during the lockdown. And in some cases, students even felt closer to their lecturers. So they felt that they were bonding better with their lecturers because of social networking. And although this might sound like an oxymoron, the fact that social media interactions were neither monitored nor structured or formalized in the ways that in the eyes of the students helped the students feel more comfortable to ask questions, which in turn helped their learning processes. Also, the informal nature of social media apps made students feel less intimidated compared to using more formal approaches such as the LMS discussion groups or the email for communication or for asking questions. As Mark said, I definitely prefer asking a question on Messenger or Viber. You don't have to use Dear or use formal formatting as we do with emails. I want to ask a question quickly and get the answer immediately. And just to add here, that in this case, this was a part-time student who was actually working at the same time. And as part of his work, he was using emails extensively. So he had actually experience with email communications. But as he explained, he preferred using social media apps because it was more convenient and fast. So it was the preferable way of actually communicating with the lecturers. So when it comes to learning, students tended to prefer social media communications. And this view was shared by many students. So every time I have a question, I just send a private message to my lecturer on Messenger after class. All of them reply almost instantly, which is great. So this was a view shared by many students. So the way students talked about their experiences highlight the importance that they attributed to the lecturer's caring and supportive approach, which extended beyond delivering the online lecture. So the lecturer's role is beyond just teaching and delivering the content, the material. Taking care of their students' well-being was also an important aspect. And the students felt that through the interactions they had with the lecturers through social media. Continuous communication through social media was highly appreciated by most students, but it was more intensively expressed by part-time students and students with family and work obligations. Furthermore, interactions through social media may increase learner engagement by enriching the interactions not only with the lecturers, but also with the fellow students, creating a sense of community. And they used social media in various ways, from sharing notes that they were taking during the lecture, sharing a solution that they were struggling with on an exercise, asking feedback from their lecturer, or even just sharing pictures of the cake they baked earlier. So at different levels, social media supported their well-being during the lockdown. And overall, they social media contributed towards reestablishing learner engagement, which was challenged during the unforeseen circumstances caused due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This quote here summarizes the view that the stories that many students shared. This lockdown experience makes me feel demotivated sometimes, and I don't want to study. It feels like time has stopped. Thankfully, we have our group chats, and it is the only way for staying in touch with our studies, for staying in touch with reality by sharing our experiences. Messenger definitely helps me. It keeps me on track. Now, moving on to the second theme, the positive experiences with using mobile computing devices and distance learning during the distance learning under lockdown. First of all, the first thing that one advantage that was pointed out was that the easy accessibility to information and course material. So they could effortlessly and quickly find access to all the material using the LMS, and they will some of them even had the respective mobile apps on their phones, so they were informed immediately about new content, new set of slides uploaded on the LMS. So this was convenience was definitely a positive experience as well, especially for those that actually had to continue working during the lockdown. So they could just connect using their personal mobile devices, their smartphones, to connect even while being at work. The concurrent use of multiple mobile computing devices was another observation. So many students talked about the fact that if for example, they wanted to use headsets, and so they were connecting from their mobile devices directly on the browser, but they will still load the PowerPoint presentation slides, the lecture slides, on their laptop, so they could actually use a bigger screen for the slides. And this was interesting to see how the students actually use the combination of technologies in order to make their experiences more comfortable while learning at home. And of course, in the positive experiences, there is that communication through social media, as well as the overall approach to learning, where they could actually self-regulate their interactions, their learning, and especially for revision and studying for the assignment, it was useful for them to have all the relevant information available. Now, in addition to the positive experiences that they shared, the anxiety, uncertainty, and distress caused by the unfolding COVID-19 crisis negatively affected their learning experiences. So from the students' point of view, the main challenge was the fact that their change in their educational context was accompanied by measures of restricted mobility and social distancing. So they could not actually talk about remote education or distant education on its own in isolation. They were discussing it, they were experiencing it along with all these restrictive measures. So the fact that this shift was rapid and imposed, and they had to go from the comfortable traditional way of learning on campus in the classroom. This has actually caused and created a number of barriers for learning and for engagement. And this was obvious even for students that were actually very active in class before the lockdown, and they were very they will always ask questions, and the change in their behavior was obvious. One of the most commonly reported frustrations from learning at a distance was the failure to concentrate. The students just looking at the screen, in many cases, in some cases, the lecturers did have the camera on, but in other cases, they didn't. So the students were describing it as just looking at the screen for hours and hours. There are also additional distractions, and the students actually mentioned that one of the most common distractions was in actually their own smartphone. And this was interesting because from one side, they said that their smartphone was actually keeping them engaged and keeping them in touch with everything and reality in general. But at the same time, during the online lectures, it was considered as a distraction. And this view was shared by the majority of the students. In addition to that, students appear to be quite impatient with technical issues and technological challenges, such as connectivity issues, not being able to hear the lecturer clearly, or background noise when students forgot to mute their mics. And it felt like they were actually impatient because everything else happened. All of this happens along with the restrictive measures. So they were quite impatient because of the combination of experiences that they were having. There were other frustrations, such as the inconsistency in the instructional approaches among lecturers. This was, however, natural. I mean, it was also a change for the lecturers themselves. It was also a change for us. However, the students did mention that they would appreciate a more universal approach, including the use of social media, which was not equally used by all the lecturers. Another aspect which was presented as negative from the students' point of view was the fact that the lectures were recorded. Given that the majority of the students at the studied higher education institution are non-native English speakers, and even though they were not really complaining about attending the lectures in English, but actually the fact that the lectures were recorded make them feel more intimidated to ask questions. So they will appear shy and they wouldn't ask a question during the lecture. Some of them will use the chat for doing that, but when they were invited to use their mic, they wouldn't do that. Even students that were actually quite active during the lecture, they will always ask questions. They were quite reserved to do that during the online lecture, the live lecture. So overall, all of these aspects led to the disengagement, and many students admitted that actually they were connecting to the lecture just to get the attendance, to get on the attendance record, but then they were not getting a value out of that. And as a result, when they were asked about their whether they think that this emergency transition to online learning would affect their performance, in their views, they said that their performance will definitely drop because of remote learning. And these extracts summarize how the students felt about that. Having our classes online due to COVID-19 will negatively impact my grades for sure. It's not the same feeling, it's a totally different experience. If another lockdown is enforced next year, I will definitely take a gap semester because I know my performance has dropped and it will show in my final grades. And just to mention, this was just towards the end of the semester. So students didn't even know yet at that point whether the exams will also take place online or they will, when the lockdown, we didn't know at that time when the lockdown will actually end. And as I said, even for part-time students, looking at the computer screen for 9 hours a day for work, and then 2-3 hours extra for the online lectures is exhausting. So they will try to concentrate, but sometimes it was simply impossible for them to do that. So these are some of the things that we need to consider, because obviously we do have the social media, we do have access to the mobile computing devices and mobile technologies that we can use, and we can make things happen given these situations that we're experiencing due to the pandemic. But at the same time, listening to student voices and their stories and the way they experience the situation can also help us reach a better understanding of how we can help them and better support them during the situation. So while the availability and flexibility of mobile technologies and social media help students stay connected with their peers, lecturers, and the learning process at large, learning at a distance was also associated with frustration and disengagement, especially in relation to the online lectures. A key observation is the fact that students could not separate their learning experience from the broader social situation presented to them by COVID-19 pandemic. So in this context, the role of social media was invaluable in re-establishing engagement and giving students an encouraging medium through which to endure the challenges. So during the lockdown, the question was no longer whether or how we can actually blend mobile and social technologies with more conventional teaching and learning approaches. That blend happened naturally. It was the only way to proceed with the academic year. So in cases like this, considering students as agents can help us explore their perspectives on the role of mobile and social technology. And such explorations can enable a better understanding of the interactions between students and mobile computing technologies and social media. So this enhanced understanding can help us address the challenges and improve students' experiences with mobile, blended, and seamless learning. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Andriani. If there are any questions, please use the Q&A app in Zoom. And I think there are a couple coming up, Andriani, if you want to respond to those.
Some questions. Okay, so the first question is how far these tools were used before the lockdown. That's an interesting question because obviously the students, as I said at the beginning, the social media apps are quite popular with students, but they were not using it to connect with their lecturers. So there's not let's say, an official policy for lecturers to not add students in their social networks, but informally there is. So this was a new experience for students, just to be able to chat on Messenger or Viber in a way, in an informal way, in the same way that they will chat with their friends. And what a question from Alice. Do you think students will answer the questions differently now since they, okay, that's an interesting point of view. And that leads to another set of exploratory questions to see after they went back to their, let's say, normal learning experiences, how they are actually reflecting on that experience, how they actually see that. Talking to them, some of them informally, actually they still stick to the initial idea that they wouldn't want to go back to the lockdown. They wouldn't want to go back to learning online. But it will be interesting to see, for example, some of the suggestions that came out from this research paper. I mean, for example, providing a more universal approach amongst lecturers, for example, whether the camera should be on, off, whether there will be some, let's say, 5 or 10 minutes at the end of each lecture without any recording. So these kind of recommendations coming from the students will be, I think these will be something they will really appreciate. And asking lecturers, yes, that's also something that I already did informally, because I was also teaching at that time. So we were sharing experiences, and it was really interesting to see that some lecturers, for some lecturers, it was the transition was easier than compared to others. So I mean, managing all these learning a new platform, being able to respond to students' questions, and basically during online learning, as you all know, we are expected from students to be available 24/7. So managing that and keeping everything else in balance is a challenge from our side as well. But it's interesting to see and that the students do appreciate that. Any other questions? So you have given me, thank you for your questions. You have given me ideas also for future research.
Well, thank you very much, Andriani.
Thank you.
Next on our schedule is a keynote from Tony Carr. Just a little bit about Tony. Tony Carr is an educational technologist at the Center for Information in Learning and Technology at the University of Cape Town. He convenes the eMERGE Africa Online Professional Network for Educational Technology, researchers and practitioners across African higher educational institutions. Tony's operational and research interests include online collaboration communities of practice in staff development, online facilitation, online professional networks, and online conference design. He has convened and led the design of 6 online conferences about the use of educational technology in African higher education between 2004 and 2018. In a previous career, he was a business and economics educator. So welcome, Tony, to his presentation, Our Conference is Really Changing.
Well, thank you very much, Richard. And I want to also say Salam alaikum and good evening to everybody, and shukran to the organizers